Hello, everyone. Welcome to Piano Lane TV. This is your host, Alexander Bui, joined by co-host Jeremy Au. Today, we have a very, very special guest. As the title suggests, the king of all instruments. And if you don't know what that is, it's an organ. That's your answer. And we have the privilege to have Samantha Scheff, an organist. And she is an undergrad graduate from the University of Maryland, College Park, where she studied with Dr. Theodore Guerrant, and a master's degree from Rutgers University, where she studied with Renée Anne Louprette. She's been a wonderful performer all around, and she's also won competitions, awarded second place in the 2019 Brooklyn AGO competition and the Westchester University International Organ Competition. Welcome, Samantha.
Hello, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Of course, and as the king of all instruments, I'm a pianist myself. And when I first looked at the organ, I said, oh my, there are more than one keyboard. And
not only is there more than one keyboard, there's also a whole keyboard just for your feet.
Yes, that's the difference. And Samantha, why don't we open up with, what makes an organ the king of all instruments?
So it kind of got this name because an organ can imitate pretty much every other instrument. And it does that through the blowing wind through pipes. That's how the organ works. And depending on if those pipes are metal, if they're wood, what kind of wood or metal they're made out of, how big the hole is that you're blowing air through, all of those things, they can imitate various sounds of the orchestra. So we have stops on the organ that can sound like a violin, stops on the organ that can sound like an oboe or a trumpet, and a vast array of other sounds. So that's kind of where the nickname comes from, is the organ as the king of instruments, because at the end of the day, you could probably do a lot of orchestral playing or things with just the organ.
Yeah, that's pretty true. I mean, you've got all types of different sections in there, brass, winds, even percussion, right? Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is, each manual, a different keyboard, has its own function. And as you're right, you can play with a range of instruments, but also the range of pitches. I think you're better than this than me, but for like the pedals, right? It's really low, and at certain instruments they're really high. So I understand that not all organ settings are in English, the instrumentations. So how do you face this as a challenge, or did you have to learn all the languages yourself?
Yeah, there's definitely a common vocabulary of stops and names that we know in French and German and Italian, and kind of various also just historical tendencies that you have to be aware of, that things aren't always marked in the score that tell us exactly what stops we're supposed to use. It involves a lot of being informed about, okay, what were organs like during Bach's time? And even though I'm now playing an organ that was built in the 1960s in New Jersey, how can I as a performer either make an artistic decision to move away from what it would have sounded like when Bach wrote this piece, or I can also make a decision to try to make it sound as close to Bach's organ as possible. So it's an endless, array of different decisions that you can make in terms of the stops, and what we call the registration is kind of the stops that you use for the specific piece. I mean, definitely a big part of that is knowing all the different stop names in lots of different languages.
So maybe like what I do, Alex, do mainly it's classical music. Well, I mean, of course, what you do is classical music too, but let's say the job type is a little bit different. So I guess maybe even me and Alex, what we do is a little bit different. To maybe me, I do strings, so maybe the opportunity I get is a lot of like group ensemble
orchestras,
right? Right. And then maybe Alex gets some things. Maybe he also he accompanies some people. Maybe he plays in some groups as well. What kind of let's say, what kind of types of opportunities do you get as organist?
So you'll find most organists holding positions in churches, and this kind of came about because the organ is very uniquely qualified to lead large groups of people in singing because of just the mechanics of blowing air through pipes and how that creates resonance in the room. It's really fantastic to support hundreds of people singing at the same time. But one thing that I found so fascinating about my career as an organist is just the wide variety of hats that you have to wear as a church musician. So in pretty much every church music job, you're not just the organist who's playing the service on Sunday, but you're usually also the choir conductor. So working with amateur singers, which also requires a high degree of teaching music, of teaching vocal pedagogy, and all of those things. You might be directing a handbell choir, you might be running a children's music program. So I find the wide variety of tasks that I get to do as a church musician really exciting.
I also work for a church and I also play organ, probably not as well as you because that's not my major instrument. However, I do understand that being an organist is being so many different things within the church itself. And I also know that there are so much administrative tasks. The larger church you are in, the more work you're probably going to have to put in, especially for the choir and also helping with the pastor and choosing music, whatever. And since it is your like professional career that you're pursuing right now, how does I don't know, the daily life of an organist for you working in a church, because I know most churches only have Sunday services.
Yeah, so my life right now, here at a church in Washington, D.C., we of course have Sunday services. We also have choir rehearsals on Thursday nights, as well as music staff meetings. And depending on the church and the kind of variety of ensembles that you have, you might have more rehearsals midweek, depending on how many ensembles you're rehearsing. There's also a variety of that administrative tasks that you mentioned. So for example, like attending staff meetings with all of the church staff to help with planning upcoming events and things like that, going to liturgy meetings with the clergy. Those things all also take up a lot of time during the week, as well as just the practicing can be quite intense. When you start to add up, I have to play 2 basically recital pieces every week as the prelude and postlude, as well as 2 to 3 choral accompaniments, which can be quite tricky, 5 hymns, a psalm, the service music. So it also just takes a large amount of time during the week to practice and get that all ready every Sunday.
Yeah, I know it's a lot to take in, and sometimes you also want to play your solo stuff, just to have fun. And sometimes you may not have the opportunity to play like a 20-minute solo in church. I know like the most famous, for everyone knows, is the Johann Sebastian Bach toccata in D minor. Have you ever had a chance to play that in a church service?
Actually, I do usually play it around Halloween as the postlude. One day, and I find that people like love it, and so they don't mind that it's a little long because they're just so excited to hear it. So I've been pretty lucky that
Oh, that's fantastic.
people are receptive to some longer things. Yeah.
When Bach played that, he got fired. So people are a lot more lenient in today's times. One thing I want to touch upon is organ is not very accessible in many areas except in churches. And also in working with churches, I also find that it is also a lost art. There are not many organists around the world as it were maybe 100 or 200 years ago, as an organ is really the oldest instrument. To my knowledge, that it is one of the oldest instruments in the world. So for people who are interested in organ or they want to learn aspects of the organ, what would you suggest to them?
I would suggest checking out a lot of the resources from our professional organization, which is the American Guild of Organists. And they actually did a survey several years ago, which was fascinating, and found that half of the people that the AGO serves have advanced degrees in music, and the other half are basically amateur organists who are doing it for the fun and perhaps have a church job and want to learn more. So they definitely serve a wide variety of people who are interested in the organ. I got my start at an organ summer camp which they host every summer for teenagers. And you can go and basically take a week of organ lessons and go to recitals. They're called pipe organ encounters and make great friends. So those are really interesting as well and a great thing to check out.
Oh, wow. And as an organist, do you also play piano or any other keyboard instrument?
Yeah, so traditionally most organists start on piano, and there's a couple pedagogical reasons for that. I mean, mainly to build musical literacy in a bit of an easier fashion than having to have an organ in your house. And it's also important, right, to develop that coordination of two hands before trying to add in feet and all the other things. So the benchmark is often that we want young pianists to be able to play a Bach two-part invention, and then they're ready to think about playing the organ. They also have to be tall enough to reach the pedals. So most organists aren't starting until around 10 to 12 years old. So I started as a pianist in middle school and high school, and then switched over to organ near the end of high school.
Wow. One thing, how do you coordinate? I already find like for Jeremy, because he already plays piano, but for other instrumentalists, when they're reading one staff, it's easy. But when they start to do two staffs, and most music majors have to take piano as sort of a learning process in their undergrad, just so they have a basic knowledge. That's already hard for them because they're not used to it. They're not used to reading the bass clef or the treble clef, whatever instrument they are on. But as a pianist, me learning the foot pedaling was really difficult because I never did it. What is your suggestion and advice for learning the pedals?
Practice.
Obviously.
At the end of the day, I think it's really manageable if you just do lots of slow practice. There's something really weird about the wiring in our brains that makes left hand and pedal the hardest. So that's where you find your left hand and your feet always kind of want to sync up and do the same thing at the same time. So if you're having trouble with that, we often suggest that students start doing a lot of separate hand and pedal practice, especially like right hand and pedal can kind of help you get going faster because it's a little bit easier to pick up.
Oh, nice. Samantha, what do you collaborate with other musicians, or you're mainly just an organist in this type of setting? Because I know organists are so their instrument is so huge in terms of sound and range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a wide variety of beautiful kind of chamber works that are written for organ. There's also organ concertos. Handel wrote a bunch. Poulenc wrote an organ concerto that's often performed. So there's opportunities to play as a soloist with an orchestra as well. I also do a lot of choral accompanying. That's a kind of bread and butter thing with church. And something I find myself doing a lot of, and always accompanying soloists here and there, or planning joint recitals because it's lots of fun. And I think it's possible for the organ to accompany any instrument and just take sensitivity, a lot of listening for balance and all of that. But it's definitely possible.
What kind of goals do you have for your career coming up?
I think just continuing on to work in church music. I'm also really excited to get back into recital playing now that the pandemic is allowing for some more opportunities to travel and to have in-person concerts. So I have several upcoming engagements this year I'm very excited about. It's always a nice like breath of fresh air to get to like prepare a program for like months and not have to play it at like 9 a.m. on a Sunday. You can feel a little more rested and awake. So I find that really enjoyable as well.
Oh, great. Speaking of concerts, do you have any coming up anytime soon?
Yeah, so on October 6th, I'm playing at the church where I work, St. John's, Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. Will be a Wednesday at 12:15, and that will kick off our year-long midweek music concerts. Once a month, we have a concert on a Wednesday.
Wonderful. Are those is just in person, or is that also being live streamed?
I'm not sure. We didn't live stream any services before the pandemic. That's been something new to us. And I'm not exactly sure where we are in the conversations about live streaming our midweek concert series.
Okay, well, if anyone's in Washington, D.C., please check Samantha Scheff out. I've viewed her videos, and she's an amazing organist. So you don't want to miss out. Now, one last fun question before we end. What is the largest organ you've ever played in your life?
Oh my, probably at Longwood Gardens in Pennsylvania. And then I have yet to play kind of the two largest organs on the East Coast bat around. It's either the Wanamaker in Philadelphia or the Atlantic City organ. I think one is larger in terms of pipes and one is larger in terms of like stops. So they constantly go back and forth about which one is bigger. But hopefully I'll get to play either one of those someday. That'd be really fun.
Well, before the pandemic, I know that the Atlantic City one, which is where I'm living near, the convention center, they usually have summer tours. And I got the chance and opportunity to walk around the pipes. The pipes are as big as me or even bigger.
Yeah, I've been back in there too. It's amazing. They go from like, your little finger to ones that you are 16 feet tall. It's amazing.
Well, that's amazing. Being an organist is so exciting because for pianos and violins or any other instruments, right? But they're very similar in size. An organ, you can have massive change in language and pitch and pipes or electric. So I think the organ really is the king of all instruments. It has so much versatility compared to other instruments, even combined, and you can play it as an orchestra. So kudos to you, Samantha, for pursuing this career as an organist. I'm very happy for you, and that you're serving the churches as well. It's a lost art, and I hope your example and you're a role model to other, wannabe organists in this field.
Thank you.
And of course, it was a pleasure to have you, Samantha, on Piano Lyn TV podcast. These podcasts are to promote our musicians, but as well as to promote the knowledge and experience for music lovers and also music amateurs, and as well as music professionals. And we're very happy to have you, Samantha. This is your host, Alexander Bowie, and co-host Jeremy Al. Thanks all for joining. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And I hope you're enjoying this content. We come out every Thursdays, and our teaching videos come out every Tuesdays and Saturdays. Check out our podcast platforms, our social medias at Piano Lyn TV. We'll see you next week. Take care, everybody.